The emergency council chamber of the Galactic Alliance station, Unity, fell silent as the holographic display flickered, showing yet another defensive line collapsing under the relentless Void Dominion assault. High Commander Zidthal's translucent tentacles dulled with stress, their usual iridescent glow faded to a sickly pale blue. "That's the Proxima barrier gone," announced the tactical officer, a tall Valerian whose exoskeleton clicked nervously. 37 strategic systems lost in less than a solar cycle. 17 representatives of the Alliance species sat around the quantum lock table, their biological diversity normally a point of pride. Now it only highlighted how different their reactions to impending doom could be. The Mithridians were practically vibrating with anxiety, their crystalline forms refracting light in distressed patterns. The Corexian delegate had molted twice during the meeting alone. "Our predictive algorithms have failed," stated the Cerebral Collective's representative, its voice synthesizer unable to hide the tremor. "The Dominion adapts to our defensive protocols faster than we can implement them." Zivthal gestured with 3 of his upper appendages, bringing up the strategic map. "Our last defensive line will collapse within 15 cycles. After that, our core worlds are exposed." The Tellurian ambassador slammed her scaled fist on the table. "Then we fight to the last. Our ancestors would demand nothing less." "Your ancestors fought with stone spears," hissed the quantum minister from Epsilon. "The Dominion weapons tear apart reality itself." As bickering erupted across the chamber, a small, rodent-like figure at the far end of the table cleared her throat. Few noticed at first. Archival officer Nendori was easily overlooked, her species having evolved to avoid attention. "If I may," she tried again, her voice finally cutting through the argument. "There might be an option we haven't considered." All eyes turned to her with varying degrees of skepticism. "In my research of ancient treaties," Nendori continued, her whiskers twitching nervously, "I discovered an agreement signed approximately 217 cycles ago with a species called humans from a planet designated Terra, though they call it Earth." "Humans," the diplomatic minister scoffed. "The volatile primates from that isolated spiral arm. They weren't deemed suitable for full Alliance membership. Too unpredictable. Too violent." Security Director Krav Morn, whose homeworld had fallen just last week, suddenly leaned forward. His species, evolved from apex predators, recognized something in Nendori's suggestion. "The humans fought 3 world wars without destroying themselves," Krav Morn said, his voice rumbling with newfound interest. "They thrive on conflict in ways we cannot comprehend." "Precisely why we limited contact," objected the Minister of Cultural Harmony. "Their entertainment alone contains more simulated violence than has occurred in the peaceful sectors in a millennium." Zivthal raised a tentacle for silence. "What exactly are you suggesting, Archival Officer?" Nendori pulled up ancient documentation on her data terminal. The treaty maintained minimal diplomatic channels. "We have the coordinates for their communication array. We could ask for help." "Absurd," muttered several delegates simultaneously. "What do we have to lose?" Krav Morn asked, quieting the room. "The Dominion will reach our homeworlds in 15 cycles. Would you rather face extinction with dignity or survival with unconventional allies?" After 3 hours of heated debate, Zivthal made the decision. A desperate transmission was encoded and sent toward a backwater system that most counselors couldn't even locate on their star charts. No one expected an answer. No one expected salvation to come from creatures described in their xenoanthropology texts as dangerously innovative and evolutionarily predisposed to conflict. No one expected the humans. Dr. Eliza Chen sat frozen before the quantum communicator, the Alliance's distress call still echoing in her lab beneath the Himalayan mountains. The message had arrived on a frequency unused for decades, encoded in a protocol so old she'd had to dust off the original decryption algorithms. "Dear God," she whispered, replaying the transmission. The holographic rendering of High Commander Zivthal's alien features couldn't hide the desperation in his multifaceted eyes. Earth's Exo-Relations Department consisted of 4 employees, a chronically malfunctioning coffee machine, and a basement office that most government officials forgot existed. The treaty signed with the Galactic Alliance centuries ago had been relegated to historical curiosities, maintained only through perfunctory diplomatic exchanges every decade or so. "Liz, you look like you've seen a ghost." Dr. Karim, her deputy, paused in the doorway, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "Worse," Chen replied, gesturing to the frozen hologram. "I've seen the future if we don't act fast." She bypassed 16 levels of bureaucracy, calling in favors from her days in military intelligence to arrange an emergency meeting with Earth's Unified Defense Council. Within hours, she stood before 20 of the most powerful military leaders on the planet, explaining a galactic war most of them hadn't known existed. "The Alliance is on the brink of collapse," Chen concluded. "If the Dominion conquers them, what do you think happens when they discover us?" Admiral Hastings removed his glasses slowly. "What exactly are they asking for? Technology? Resources? They don't specify. Just help." Chen displayed the tactical data the Alliance had included. Their military strategies are methodical, precise, and utterly predictable. The Dominion has adapted to counter everything they try. From the back of the room, a voice cut through the ensuing debate. "They need someone who thinks outside their perfect little box." Heads turned as Commander Jackson Reynolds stepped forward, his presence a surprise to everyone, including Chen. Currently serving a disciplinary assignment in Antarctica for what his superiors called excessive creative interpretation of military doctrine, Reynolds wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this meeting. "The Alliance species evolved in stable environments," Reynolds continued, examining the alien combat footage. "They developed technology before they developed effective warfare. We did it backwards." He looked up, eyes alight with understanding. "They don't need our ships or our guns. They need our unpredictability." 26 hours later, Reynolds strode into the Alliance headquarters on Unity Station wearing a battered leather jacket, carrying Earth military history on a simple data drive, and chewing gum, a sight so incongruous that the tentacled receptionist dropped all 4 datapads she was holding. "I hear you've got a pest problem," Reynolds said, eyeing the celestial map of Dominion conquests that dominated the atrium. The red zone of conquered territories had spread like a bloodstain across the galactic spiral. High Commander Zivthal himself came to meet the human, accompanied by a delegation of bewildered Alliance officials. They had expected a formal diplomatic response, committees, negotiations. Instead, they got a single human with a confident smile and eyes that had seen combat. "Commander Reynolds," Zivthal began formally, "the Galactic Alliance welcomes." "Show me everything they've done," Reynolds interrupted. "And everything you've tried that's failed. Then get me a room with your best tactical officers." He paused, glancing at the stunned faces around him. Faces that had expected to navigate weeks of diplomatic protocols before any action was taken. "The clock's ticking, folks. You didn't call Earth because you wanted polite. You called because you were losing." "This is suicide," declared Admiral Vexcor, his chidnous mandibles clicking in agitation as Reynolds explained his first tactical recommendation. The human paced the strategy room, ignoring the sophisticated floating holograms to draw crude diagrams with actual ink on physical paper, a barbaric method that horrified the technology-dependent Alliance officers. 3 hours into the briefing, and the cultural shock had only deepened. "Your ships move in perfect formations. Your responses follow textbook sequences." Reynolds tapped the tactical display showing the previous 17 engagements. "Look at the pattern. Every time you do something, the Dominion counters in the exact same way. You're predictable, and in war, predictable means dead." Tactical Coordinator Ish Vera, her luminescent skin pulsing with skepticism, gestured to the simulation models. "Our battle doctrines are the result of millions of cycles of refinement. They represent the pinnacle of strategic evolution." Reynolds barked a laugh that made several officers flinch. "Evolution doesn't produce perfection. It produces adaptation. Big difference." He turned to Zivthal. Let me demonstrate. Put your best commander against me in a simulation. Grand Fleet Commander Tolvax, the Alliance's most decorated naval officer, stepped forward with barely concealed disdain. I have overseen 342 successful engagements. Congratulations, Reynolds replied with a smirk. I've lost 6 simulated wars before breakfast. You learn more from losing than winning. The gathered officers watched in stunned silence as Reynolds took control of a simulated fleet. Instead of the organized formations they expected, he scattered his ships in seemingly random patterns. He violated every principle of space combat they'd established, sending small groups on what appeared to be suicide runs, only to reveal they were diversions. He sacrificed valuable assets to protect seemingly worthless positions. His maneuvers had no discernible pattern. Within minutes, Tolvax's perfect formation lay in ruins, outmaneuvered by tactics no Alliance commander would ever consider. Impossible, Tolvax whispered. Reynolds shut down the simulation. Humans don't just study war, he explained, pulling up Earth's bloody history of innovation through conflict. We evolved as apex predators who learned to hunt things bigger and faster than ourselves. We don't win by following rules. We win by changing the game entirely. He introduced concepts alien to them. Feigned retreats, false flag operations, asymmetric warfare, psychological tactics designed to confuse and demoralize. With each example from Earth's military history, the Alliance officers grew more disturbed yet increasingly fascinated. The Art of War by Sun Tzu, Reynolds continued, displaying the ancient text. Written over 2,000 years ago, yet we still study it. All warfare is based on deception. When capable, feign incapability. When active, inactivity. When near, make it appear that you are far away. When far away, that you are near. You deliberately mislead your enemies, asked a horrified minister of ethical combat. Where is the honor in such tactics? Reynolds' expression hardened. Honor doesn't matter to the dead. You fight with honor, and you're losing. The Dominion doesn't care about your ethical combat codes. Silence fell across the room as the implications sank in. Your species fears chaos, Reynolds said more gently. You build societies that minimize it, strategies that control it. Humans, we were born in chaos. It's our natural environment. He looked around the room, meeting each alien gaze. The Dominion expects you to behave like you always have. They won't expect what I'm about to teach you. High Commander Zivthal studied the human for a long moment before making his decision. Commander Reynolds is hereby granted provisional advisory status to the Allied fleet. He raised a tentacle to silence the immediate objections. We have 12 cycles before our final defensive line falls. If we cannot learn to embrace unpredictability by then, we will not survive to regret it. Proxima Defense Station shuddered as the first Dominion warships emerged from subspace. The massive orbital fortress, once the pride of Alliance engineering, now served as the final line before the critical Viridian system fell. Station Commander Lirvox had evacuated all non-essential personnel hours ago. Few expected the station to survive the day. Dominion Vanguard has deployed in standard helix formation, reported the sensor officer. 37 capital ships, supporting craft in defensive arrays. Reynolds stood on the command deck drinking coffee from a chipped mug he'd brought from Earth. His casual posture contrasted sharply with the rigid alertness of the Alliance officers. Right on schedule, Reynolds murmured, checking his primitive wristwatch, and predictable as ever. For 3 days, he had worked with the station's crew, implementing changes that violated centuries of Alliance military doctrine. Weapon systems had been recalibrated to fire at reduced efficiency, but increased unpredictability. Communication protocols had been deliberately corrupted to create conflicting signals. Decoy targets had been deployed in formations that made no strategic sense. The Dominion fleet approached in their perfect formation, resembling a massive double helix of destruction that had broken 17 defense lines before this one. They're scanning us, announced the tactical officer. They've detected our apparent systems failures and adjusted their approach to exploit our weaknesses. Reynolds smiled. Now, hidden throughout the asteroid field surrounding the station, Alliance vessels that had been running silent suddenly powered up. They struck not at the heavily defended core of the Dominion formation, but at the support vessels that all previous Alliance commanders had considered secondary targets. On the main view screen, confusion visibly spread through the enemy fleet. Their perfect formation began to fragment as commanders received conflicting data about the station's capabilities. "They're attempting to regroup," said Lurvox, mandibles clicking with nervous energy. "This pattern is, I've never seen the Dominion hesitate before." "That's because you've always done exactly what they expected," Reynolds replied, setting down his coffee. Launch Phase 2. Across the battlefield, more chaos erupted as dormant mines activated in seemingly random patterns, cutting off escape vectors that the Dominion had assumed would remain clear. Meanwhile, the station itself appeared to suffer catastrophic power failures in its defensive systems, luring enemy ships closer. "They think we're crippled," Reynolds explained, watching the Dominion ships adjust their attack vectors. "They can't resist an easy target." When the trap finally closed, it did so with devastating effect. The station's supposedly failed defenses came online at full power, catching 3 Dominion capital ships in crossfire. The hidden Alliance vessels struck from vectors the enemy had dismissed as tactically worthless. 4 hours later, the battle ended. 17 Dominion ships had been destroyed, 3 captured, and the remainder had retreated in disarray. The Alliance had suffered losses, but the station stood intact, the first significant defeat the Dominion had experienced in the entire war. Later that night, Reynolds found the station's alien crew gathered in the mess hall, studying human military history with horrified fascination. On display screens, they watched ancient footage of Earth's world wars, guerrilla campaigns, and asymmetric conflicts. "Your species," Lurvox said quietly as Reynolds joined him, "fights differently than any civilization we've encountered." "We had to," Reynolds replied. "Humans spent millennia fighting each other before we ever looked to the stars. We had to get creative to survive." "The casualties today," Lurvox began, his voice troubled, "were far fewer than if we'd followed traditional doctrine." Reynolds finished firmly. "Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to save a queen." Across the station, the news was spreading. For the first time since the war began, the Alliance had victory to celebrate. A single battle wouldn't win the war, but it had accomplished something perhaps even more valuable. It had kindled hope. As Reynolds planned his next move, urgent communications arrived from Earth. Humanity had made its decision. They would not stand by while the Alliance fought alone. The Alliance Council chamber erupted in shocked whispers as the holographic display showed the approaching human fleet. News of the victory at Proxima Defense Station had spread rapidly, transforming Reynolds from an oddity to a curiosity. Now, as he stood at the center of the chamber wearing a formal Earth military uniform, adorned with medals and insignia no alien could interpret, he had become something else entirely, a harbinger of change. 3 days ago, Reynolds announced, I transmitted a full assessment of the Dominion threat to Earth's Unified Defense Council. Today, I bring their answer. The display zoomed out, revealing not the dozen diplomatic vessels the Alliance had expected, but thousands of ships of varying configurations. Many were clearly converted civilian vessels, cargo haulers, mining platforms, and passenger liners, hurriedly retrofitted with weapons systems and reinforced hulls. By the ancestral light, whispered High Commander Zivfall, his tentacles paling. How many vessels are there? 4,317, Reynolds replied. And more are coming. Diplomatic Minister Torlak stepped forward, compound eyes blinking rapidly in disbelief. This is impossible. Your species is limited to a single star system. You cannot possibly have mobilized a fleet of this size in mere days. Reynolds smiled. Minister, humans have been preparing for apocalyptic scenarios since we invented the concept of apocalypse. Every major nation on Earth maintains contingency fleets. When united by a common threat, We move quickly. The strategic minister's exoskeleton rattled with concern. But these vessels, many appear to be civilian craft. Surely they cannot stand against Dominion weaponry. When humans fight, Reynolds explained, we don't send just soldiers. We send our culture, our history, our diversity. Each vessel brings not just weapons, but perspectives the galactic community has never encountered. The display highlighted different sections of the approaching fleet, ships from Earth's maritime nations, crewed by sailors whose ancestors have navigated treacherous oceans for thousands of years. Vessels commanded by descendants of nomadic peoples who mastered survival in Earth's harshest environments. Combat units trained in traditions dating back to our earliest warfare. As if to emphasize his point, the communication system activated, showing the interior of one of the larger human vessels. A group of towering, muscular humans with intricate facial tattoos performed a rhythmic, stomping dance, eyes bulging, tongues extended in defiance. The haka, Reynolds explained to the bewildered council, a traditional war dance of the Maori warriors from New Zealand. For centuries, it struck fear into the hearts of their enemies before battle even began. Another screen activated, showing humans in different uniforms sharpening curved blades while chanting in synchronized voices. Gurkha regiments, Reynolds continued. Fighters so fierce that an old saying claims, if a man says he is not afraid of dying, he is either lying or is a Gurkha. More screens lit up around the chamber, each displaying different human military traditions. Japanese tactical experts discussing ancient military philosophies, Arctic warfare specialists preparing cold weather equipment, desert fighters demonstrating survival techniques from Earth's most unforgiving environments. The Alliance Council witnessed not just military might, but a species that had transformed its violent tendencies into thousands of unique approaches to conflict, all now focused on the Dominion. Humanity stands with the Alliance, Reynolds declared, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. Not as a single force, but as thousands of distinct fighting traditions. The Dominion has adapted to your predictable patterns because you fight as one. We fight as many. An elderly cerebral collective representative spoke, its synthesized voice trembling. Commander Reynolds, we are grateful for Earth's assistance, but I must ask, why? Your world was safe, unknown to the Dominion. Why risk everything for aliens you barely know? Reynolds' expression softened. Because that's another human tradition. Throughout our bloody history, one truth has remained constant. We may fight amongst ourselves, but when faced with a common enemy threatening innocent lives, humans stand together. Today, we extend that tradition beyond our world. As the council adjourned, Alliance officers crowded around the humans who had begun arriving on the station, their previous apprehension replaced by desperate hope. For the first time since the war began, they allowed themselves to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the tide might turn. Operation Thunderclap began with a tactic so audacious that Alliance commanders initially refused to believe it would work. Human ships deliberately allowing themselves to be detected in the Arcturus sector, then fleeing in apparent disarray, violating every principle of organized space combat that had governed interstellar warfare for millennia. They're taking the bait, Reynolds announced, standing aboard the Alliance Command Carrier Eternal Vigilance *. The strategic display showed Dominion pursuit vessels breaking formation to chase the seemingly vulnerable human ships. Admiral Vexcor, who had become one of Reynolds' unlikely supporters after the Proxima victory, chittered nervously. The Dominion High Command isn't foolish. They will recognize this as a trap. Of course they will, Reynolds agreed, surprising the Admiral. They'll assume it's a simple ambush with hidden Alliance ships waiting to spring on their flanks. That's why we're not doing that. Instead, the human vessels executed a maneuver inspired by ancient naval tactics from Earth's Age of Sail. As they approached the Markovian Nebula, they abruptly scattered in 3 dimensions, using the nebula's electromagnetic properties to mask their signatures. The Dominion pursuit force, attempting to predict and counter the expected Alliance ambush, found themselves surrounded not by warships, but by a swarm of automated decoys that had been seeded throughout the nebula days earlier. Dominion fleet is dividing to engage the decoys, reported the tactical officer. Their formation is compromising. Reynolds nodded. Now, Admiral. The real attack came not from hidden Alliance ships, but from the very human vessels that had appeared to flee. They had executed a complex spherical loop through the nebula's densest regions, emerging behind the Dominion fleet. Their targeting systems, modified by human engineers to embrace random variations rather than perfect efficiency, confused the Dominion defenses that had been calibrated to counter the Alliance's predictable firing patterns. On the command deck, Alliance officers watched in astonishment as human captains implemented strategies considered suicidal by Galactic standards. A mining vessel converted to a combat carrier deliberately vented its atmosphere to alter its trajectory without engines, achieving an attack vector the Dominion had calculated as physically impossible. A former passenger liner, its luxury decks now housing Marine barracks, accelerated directly toward a Dominion destroyer in what appeared to be a collision course, only to deploy boarding pods at the last possible moment. "They're insane," whispered a Valerian lieutenant, watching the battle unfold. "They're human," corrected Admiral Vexcor. Meanwhile, special operations teams composed of Earth's most elite warriors boarded key Dominion vessels. The aliens had never developed significant anti-boarding protocols. Space combat had been conducted at a distance for so long that close-quarters fighting had become nearly obsolete. The humans exploited this weakness ruthlessly. Helmet camera footage streamed to the command carrier, showing human Marines fighting through Dominion corridors with a ferocity that stunned even their Alliance allies. Earth's diverse combat traditions were on full display. Korean Marines using their national martial art of Taekwondo against Dominion security forces. British SAS operatives setting complex ambushes in maintenance corridors. Brazilian jungle warfare specialists adapting their techniques to the alien environment. A particularly intense moment came when a squad of Russian naval infantry, cut off and surrounded on a Dominion flagship, broadcast their ancient battle cry across all frequencies before charging into seemingly impossible odds and winning through sheer ferocity and refusal to surrender. By the operation's end, 3 Dominion systems had been liberated, and their once invincible fleet had suffered unprecedented losses. For the first time in the war, the Alliance had seized the initiative. In the aftermath, Reynolds stood silently reviewing casualty reports. Alliance officers approached cautiously, having noticed his solemn demeanor despite the victory. "The cost troubles you," observed Zidfal. Reynolds nodded. "It always should. The moment we celebrate war without mourning its cost is the moment we become no better than the Dominion. Yet your species seems adapted for this kind of conflict." "Not adapted," Reynolds corrected. "Experienced. There's a difference." He looked up from the reports. "We know the price of victory because we've paid it countless times. That's why we're fighting. So your species don't have to learn that lesson the way we did." As planning for the next phase began, intelligence reports brought disturbing news. The Dominion High Command, enraged by their defeats, had finally identified the source of the Alliance's newfound strength. They were mobilizing their remaining fleets for a single devastating target: Earth. The Dominion High Command, a collection of shadowy figures who hadn't faced real opposition in centuries, gathered in their fortress citadel orbiting a dying star. Their perfect record of conquest had been tarnished, their invincible mystique shattered by creatures they'd never bothered to study. "The solution is obvious," declared Supreme Strategist Corvex, his voice echoing through the obsidian chamber. "We will excise this human infection at its source." Intelligence scans had finally traced the origin of these unpredictable warriors to a blue-green world in an unremarkable spiral arm. The Dominion assembled their remaining fleets, a force still powerful enough to obliterate most star systems, and set course for Earth. When Reynolds received word of the impending attack, he was in the midst of planning the Alliance's next offensive. His face drained of color as he studied the intelligence reports. "How long?" he demanded. 3 solar days until they reach Sol system, replied the Alliance intelligence officer. Reynolds activated the quantum communicator immediately. Earth Defense Command. This is Reynolds. Implement Fortress Protocol. Repeat, Fortress Protocol. Authentication code Sierra Tango 947. The Dominion expected to find a vulnerable homeworld defended by the small contingent of ships humans had kept in reserve. Instead, they encountered a planet transformed into a fortress. Every nation on Earth had contributed to its defense, drawing on cultural memories of invasions both successful and repelled. The outer system bristled with automated defense platforms disguised as asteroids, technology Earth had been developing in secret for decades. Massive rail guns on Luna fired hypersonic projectiles that tore through the first wave of Dominion scouts. Former nuclear missile silos now housed gravitic disruptors designed using principles gleaned from Alliance technology. Impossible, murmured the Dominion fleet commander as preliminary scans reached his flagship. These defenses, they shouldn't have this technology. The Dominion's initial attack faltered against Earth's outer defenses, but their overwhelming numbers began to tell. Slowly, methodically, they pushed toward the third planet, their tactics adjusting to counter the human resistance. But Earth had one final surprise. When the Dominion flagship established communication to demand surrender, they received instead a psychological warfare package orchestrated by Dr. Chen. Thousands of simultaneous transmissions containing Earth's most primal symbols of defiance flooded every Dominion communication channel. Viking berserker chants that had terrorized Europe, the rhythmic stomping of 10,000 Maori warriors performing haka in unison, the battle cries of Zulu impis who had once defeated the British Empire, the thundering drums of indigenous cultures that had fought against overwhelming odds throughout history. The Dominion command structure, built on cold logic and uniformity, began to fracture under this incomprehensible assault on their senses. Their neural networks, designed to process tactics and strategy, struggled to filter the emotional content bombarding them. In orbit above Earth, a combined force of human and Alliance vessels engaged the disoriented Dominion fleet. Reynolds, commanding from a hastily retrofitted aircraft carrier Indomitable Asterisk, now converted for space operations, coordinated the defense. Their regrouping, warned Admiral Hastings from Lunar Command. Their main force is preparing to break through to atmospheric range. Reynolds studied the tactical display, seeing the moment of crisis approaching. If the Dominion reached low Earth orbit, their weapons could devastate the surface. All ships, Reynolds broadcast across the combined fleet. This is Commander Reynolds. Earth has stood against impossible odds throughout our history. Today, we stand not just for humanity, but for every species that values freedom. Execute Thermopylae Protocol. Across the battlefield, human vessels charged directly into the heart of the Dominion formation. Not in the perfect attack patterns the Alliance would have used, but in seemingly chaotic, individualistic approaches that confounded Dominion targeting systems. Ships from different Earth nations employed tactics reflecting their unique military traditions. Japanese vessels executing complex maneuvers inspired by ancient samurai battle formations. Russian ships absorbing punishing damage to deliver devastating close-range attacks. Brazilian carriers deploying fighters in fluid, capoeira-like patterns that seemed to dance between enemy vessels. The final breaking point came when the Dominion flagship, attempting to organize a cohesive response, found itself surrounded by vessels from a dozen Earth nations, each attacking in a completely different, unpredictable style. "What are they?" demanded the Dominion Supreme Commander as his ship's defenses failed against attacks coming from vectors his tactical computers insisted were impossible. The Dominion retreat became a rout, their once invincible armada now in disarray before a species they had dismissed as primitive. As the remains of their fleet fled the Sol system, Earth stood bloodied but unbowed, its diverse defenders united in victory. In the command center beneath the Himalayan mountains, Reynolds watched the Dominion signatures vanish from long-range sensors, then turned to the assembled alien representatives of the Alliance. "Now," he said with a grim smile, "we take the fight to them. 3 months after the Battle of Earth, the Galactic Council convened in their restored Great Chamber on Unity Station. The Dominion had sued for peace after a series of crushing defeats, their once unstoppable war machine reduced to a fraction of its former might. Throughout Alliance space, the name human had become synonymous with salvation. The formal ceremony to grant Earth full membership in the Galactic Alliance had attracted delegates from every member species. Many had traveled for weeks just to witness the historic moment when humanity would take its place among the stars. Commander Reynolds, now wearing his dress uniform adorned with both Earth and Alliance commendations, stood before the council. The chamber fell silent as High Commander Zivthal rose to speak. For 17 millennia, the Galactic Alliance has represented the pinnacle of civilized cooperation, Zivthal began. Today, we welcome the species that taught us that civilization need not mean predictability, and cooperation need not mean uniformity. Reynolds stepped forward, but instead of accepting the offered membership token, he raised his hand. "Before you vote," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber, "you need to see our whole history." A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembly as Reynolds activated the holographic system. The display showed not just humanity's triumphs, but their darkest chapters. World wars that had killed millions, genocides perpetrated against their own kind, civilizations that had risen and fallen through conflict, environmental destruction that had nearly rendered their planet uninhabitable. "This is who we are," Reynolds continued as the council watched in stunned silence. "We're not just warriors. We're not just saviors. We've been conquerors, destroyers, and tyrants. We've stood on the precipice of self-annihilation multiple times." He advanced the display to show humanity's greatest achievements: art that moved alien hearts, music that transcended species boundaries, philosophies of peace forged by those who knew war's true cost, acts of sacrifice and heroism not in battle, but in hospitals, in burning buildings, in sinking ships where humans had given their lives for strangers. "We learned to fight because we first learned to care deeply," Reynolds explained. "Our capacity for violence exists because we can be wounded, not just physically, but here." He placed his hand over his heart. "We fight fiercely because we love fiercely. Our greatest strength isn't our unpredictability. It's our duality." The council chamber remained silent as Reynolds concluded his presentation with images of Earth's children, playing, learning, dreaming of the stars. "Accept us for what we truly are," he said softly. "Not as perfect warriors or saviors, but as humans, complicated, contradictory, and still evolving. We offer not just our strength in battle, but our art, our music, our literature, our philosophy, all shaped by the same chaotic history that made us such effective fighters." The Cerebral Collective representative spoke first. "You show us your flaws alongside your virtues. No species has done this at their induction." "Because understanding our flaws is how we improve," Reynolds replied. "We've nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. We've learned it the hard way." After hours of deliberation, the council's decision was unanimous, but with a profound new dimension of respect. Earth was welcomed not as a military asset, but as a complex, valuable addition to galactic civilization. The epilogue showed the changes rippling through the Alliance in the year that followed. Alliance ships now incorporated human officers, bringing unpredictability to their strategies. Diplomatic teams studied Earth's diverse cultures for negotiation techniques. Scientific collaborations merged Alliance technology with human creativity, yielding breakthroughs neither could have achieved alone. In the newly established Earth Embassy on Unity Station, a young Mithridian cadet approached Reynolds, who had become humanity's first official ambassador. "Commander," the crystalline being asked hesitantly, "many still wonder, are humans naturally violent?" Reynolds smiled, gazing out the viewport at the stars. "We're naturally everything. That's what makes us human. We contain the entire spectrum of possibility, from your worst nightmare to your greatest ally. The real question has always been which path we choose when called upon." The final scene showed a Dominion diplomatic vessel arriving for peace negotiations, its occupants visibly unsettled to find humans leading the Alliance delegation. Yet, instead of the aggression they feared, the humans greeted them with unexpected gestures of respect and offers of genuine reconciliation. This, Reynolds explained to the bewildered Dominion representatives, is also the human way of war, knowing when to stop fighting and start building. Because ultimately, we learned long ago that true victory isn't measured by what you destroy, but by what you create in its place. As the peace talks began, the gathered species, former enemies and allies alike, glimpsed the final, perhaps most important truth about humanity, that their greatest unpredictability lay not in their capacity for violence, but in their capacity for forgiveness.